with that in mind, TLDR News have just released a video about the kind of the contents of the Sugoi report. I have not read the Sugoi report myself, so I'm going to be able to use this to be able to educate myself and you as well about the entirety of the contents of the Sugoi report, and then we can have a little bit of a talk about the ramifications of what's been said, and then after that we'll move on to the cost of living measures that have been implemented by the Chancellor today. So let's bring up this video and let's have a look and see what's up.
This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream, which is, just for this week, at its cheapest price ever of $11.59 a year. Get access to bonus TLDR content and all of our videos ad-free by signing up to the CuriosityStream Nebula bundle deal right now. It's linked down below. After months of waiting, it's finally here. The Sugoi report. Commissioned by Boris Johnson, the report looks into lockdown rule breaking in 10 Downing Street, whether there was a partying culture, and who was responsible. So let's break down what this final 40-page report actually has to say, and run through what could happen now for Boris Johnson. So, what's actually in the report? What did Gray find out? Well, the most shocking revelations to come from the Sugoi report were the specific details about how the parties were conducted in Number 10. And that's because the parties often don't come across as if they're being held by serious members of the government and civil service, but instead, they often look like they're being held by teenagers who have just got their first taste of cheap spirits. For example, at the 18th of June 2020 event, which was held to say goodbye to a Number 10 official, Helen McNara brought along a karaoke machine. There were also reports that an individual was sick, and that there was an altercation between two individuals at the party. In fact,
There's literally just like a bunch of lads having like a house party. That's literally what that was, which I find, I mean, it's quite amusing to understand that, these are real people, right? These are just real people who are getting involved in the actual partying culture, just normal people who work at Number 10, rather than specifically anybody from, I don't know, the upper echelons of the cabinet.
the last person to leave, who left after tidying up, only departed Downing Street at 3:13 a.m. At another party on December 17th, people stayed until about 1 a.m. And just a day later, there was a discussion about purchasing a wine fridge for the office. And people were asked to chip in £5 towards the purchase. And by the way, that conversation on screen is real. Anyway, maybe...
I mean, to be fair, like, it makes sense that they would have, if the, if they've got this kind of partying culture and they've realised they've got, at this point, it's been 6-7 months of hard partying at this point, by this time, by the 18th of December, they've realised they've gotten away with it so far. They've literally got away scot-free at this point. So why not just buy the wine fridge and be able to make sure continue to be able to party? Because obviously lots of these things were well planned in advance. So, once you realise that, you can continue doing this, might as well prepare by getting the wine fridge. Wine Time Friday? Fucking hell. Is there any chance of Johnson being punished at all? He's been given a fixed penalty notice of 50 quid by the Metropolitan Police for the one party that he attended, which there's a photo of with like him standing in front of a platter of like M&S sandwiches and like a pitcher of orange juice. It's a pretty pathetic photo to be sure, but the issue is that he's already said that and already essentially admitted that he lied to Parliament multiple times about the aspects of what's included in the report. That's the issue, really. Whether or not the parties happened or not isn't, quite frankly, that's not really a huge issue. The bigger issue is, of course, him continually saying that there were no parties, and then it became, well, there were gatherings, but we were sure the rules were being followed to, well, I didn't break the rules, I broke the rules on this one occasion, and I apologised and got this fixed penalty notice, and now it's all come to light that there were parties going on, and this was well known by everybody at Number 10. And obviously, that's a lie. That's just something that he said didn't happen in Number 10. A quid is quid is like our term for bucks, right? So the same way that you would call $1 a buck, we would call £1 a quid, basically. So he's already said and already lied to the House by saying that he had no knowledge of parties going on. Well, it's clear that he did. There was a culture of it was going on over and over again. Wine Time Friday. It's very, very obvious to everybody that this was a thing that was going on right under his nose, and he knew it, and everybody knew about it, right? And it was being specifically covered up by people, and it's all just kind of come to light now.
Maybe unsurprisingly, that day's party was said to be crowded and noisy, and others within the building characterized it as a party. It was so raucous, in fact, that cleaners the next day noticed that wine had been spilled on the wall, as well as on a number of boxes of photocopier paper. In fact, on this point, in the conclusion of her report, Gray even states, "I was made aware of multiple examples of a lack of respect and poor treatment of cleaning staff," going on to describe it as unacceptable. Presumably, this wine incident was part of it, but her words imply that there was additional evidence of this. Furthermore, at the 16th of April 2021 event, the event that took
Yeah, literally just college students. That's literally all it is.
place the day before Prince Philip's funeral, Gray also acknowledges that a slide stroke swing was broken in number 10's garden. And again, that
What? I did not hear about this on Twitter. Fucking hell, this is the best bit. A child swing in the garden. This is the day before the Queen had to go to whatever fucking chapel this is on her own for Prince Philip's funeral because of the lockdown regulations.
That doesn't sound like the kind of thing you'd expect from serious members of government and the civil service. Aside from the rather teenage-esque nature of their parties, arguably the most significant revelation in the report is how civil servants actually discussed the gatherings. In fact, in early 2020, some staffers demonstrated an attitude that parties were okay and simply just something which would be hidden from journalists and kept out of the news. Possibly the worst example of this was when Martin Reynolds was discussing the 20th of March 2020 gathering. In an exchange with a number 10 advisor, Reynolds was sent the following message on WhatsApp. "Just a flag, the press conference will probably be finishing at about that time. So helpful if people can be mindful of that as speakers and cameras are leaving, not walking around waving bottles of wine, etc."
Jesus, literally, they were literally specifically trying to cover it up. This is this is just unreal. Like I've had loads of takes about like how relevant I think issues such as the parties in comparison to everything else the Tories have done. Yeah, this is just beyond belief. Although there was, speaking of your comment there about government jerks mistreating cleaning staff. This is really great George Osborne tweet. Now, for those who don't know, this guy was the Chancellor of the Exchequer for the five years of the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, in which they basically unleashed a reign of terror, in which they implemented so much austerity that the estimates suggest that almost up to 130,000 people died because of the policies that they did, right? So this guy's this guy's a real fucking ghoul. He's now the editor of like a big London free newspaper, so he gets to use his incredible power and influence that he used to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer to now shape the media kind of landscape in London as well. So he's a real fucking piece of work. Tweeting out saying, one of the things I remember most about living in Downing Street was how amazingly friendly, generous, and kind the team who kept the place going are. The cleaners, custodians, front of house, and the police, working all hours, not very well paid, but always there for us. This guy was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's literally his job to set the wages of the people who work in the civil service at number 10. So all of the cleaners and custodians and front of house people, he chose their pay, and now he's complaining that they weren't well paid, and yet they were obviously nice to him as well. So it was his job to make sure that they weren't underpaid, and now he's saying that they weren't well paid. It's beyond belief the things people would tweet out. Although to be fair, he is a mass murderer, so they're probably just scared of him. That's why they were nice to him.
To which Martin Reynolds replies, "Will do my best." Later that day, Reynolds got back on WhatsApp, and seemingly discussing another story that he didn't deem to be newsworthy, he messaged, "Best of luck, a complete non-story, but better than them focusing on our drinks, which we seem to have got away with." It seems obvious then that
Additionally, we've got away with it. Like those words, caught in 4K.
there was clearly an attitude among senior number 10 staffers that their partying was acceptable as long as it didn't become a news story. It's additionally clear that this attitude was present all the way back in May of 2020, and that it persisted until at least December of that year, as demonstrated by an event on the 15th of December 2020. This was the quiz at number 10, when an email was sent around about the drunkenness of people within the building. And in effect, people were told to leave via the back door of the building to avoid being photographed by the press. To most people, this would demonstrate that those involved knew that what they were doing was wrong and were only worried about being caught by eagle-eyed journalists. And internally, many advisors seemed rather flippant about these gatherings. The May 20th gathering in the garden was signed off by a member of Number 10's internal events team. Sounds like a lot of fun. That's fine. However, the tone did shift somewhat. Later in the year, at the December parties, emails inviting people to the events often seem to include some sort of disclaimer encouraging people to join remotely and not to come to work specifically for the events. It seems then that between May and December, Number 10 developed their own set of rules, becoming more conscious about the legality of their parties, but excusing them on the condition that no one came in especially, rotas were used, and social distancing followed. However, that simply wasn't the law, and this was a custom rule set which other workplaces would never have been afforded. Gray even acknowledges this in the conclusions section of her report, admitting that many will be dismayed by the events, and going on to comment that they don't reflect on the wider civil service. She also acknowledges that the way that gatherings were developed was not in line with COVID regulations, and that many people in attendance were in breach of the law. So, that's the detail of the events as outlined by Sue Gray. And now we know a little more about the details, it's worth addressing some of the retorts made by Johnson's supporters. Firstly, looking at these photos, many would dispute that they're even parties. I mean, it's called Partygate after all, and where's Pin the Tail on the Donkey? Now, to be fair, these might not look like major parties, but the point isn't what the definition of party is. It doesn't really matter how many party boxes were ticked, although someone being sick at the leaving drinks is a box tick for sure. Regardless, the rules clearly stated that social gatherings were forbidden, so the definition of party doesn't really matter. The fact they were gathering is enough to break the rules. It doesn't need to be a party. But what if these weren't even social events? Maybe these are work meetings and just ordinary, dull leaving drinks, as the Telegraph's Andrew Lillico claimed before he blocked us for questioning his justification.
It's just so shameless. It's completely fucking shameless. They know that it's just cope. They know that it's complete cope. Any idea that what they were doing was anyway not in breach of the law, right? They know that they're wrong. They know they're in the wrong, and they're just trying to find any kind of like thrown together justification to try and ameliorate the way in which that they've had their image, kind of tarnished by what's been happening here, right? It's just so shameless.
However, whether or not these are normal workplace events isn't the issue either. The law specifically stated in November 2020 that gatherings of 2 or more people aren't permitted unless they're absolutely necessary for work purposes. In his statement yesterday, Johnson insisted that saying goodbye to a team member was essential, but it's hard to justify how these leaving drinks are necessary at a time when people weren't allowed to go to funerals or say goodbye to loved ones, especially.
Yeah, literally, including the fucking Queen. The Queen wasn't allowed to have anybody else at her funeral, but the fucking Prince Philip, right? Because obviously it was televised. They can, allow rule breaking to be televised, right? And yet they're just sitting here saying, well, actually, no, like we need to be able to go to these drinks because it's necessary for work purposes, as if funerals aren't more necessary than fucking leaving drinks. That's completely absurd. Obviously, I'm not a fan of the Queen. Talked about that plenty on this channel, right? But this is the most high-profile funeral in the country over the course of this period when, hundreds of thousands of people died to COVID, right? And they're saying, well, actually, them having multiple people at the funeral, that's not okay. But leaving drinks, now that is essential to have everybody there. How fitting is the name Johnson when he has a massive donghead? Very, very true, Saravain. It's crazy that there's still gonna back Boris people out there. Like, they're the kind of people when, like, if Boris Johnson kind of broke into their house and, like, pissed on their food, they would go, well, actually, it's got to piss somewhere. He's just doing his best at the end of the day about everything that goes wrong.
When these goodbye messages and drinks could easily have been conducted over Zoom. Even more so when necessary leaving drinks like these ended with some so drunk they were sick, and others getting into minor altercations. In fact, the issue of work doesn't even play into this at all. The law at the time only allowed people to go into work if they were socially distancing and fulfilling totally necessary functions. So even if they were allowed to be in the office, even if they tried to justify it as a morale-boosting exercise following a challenging period for staff, these parties, gatherings, whatever you want to call them, still aren't justified because morale boosting has never been specified as an essential work function, despite the claims made by Michael Fabricant and other.
I mean, if you want to morale boost, you can just morale boost people, on Zoom, right? You don't need to be in work, in person, not socially distanced, to be able to do some kind of morale boosting exercise. Like, as someone who works from home permanently, those are things that we do without having to go back into the office. Oh, it certainly is the ceiling of his competence. The guy's a fucking clown.
Other supporters, other professions who have been working hard, like nurses, still weren't holding drinks after work. The hardness of work is never in question here, because the law didn't allow you to break the rules if your stress met a certain threshold. So ultimately, it doesn't matter if this was a party or not, it doesn't matter if it would be allowed in a workplace ordinarily, and it doesn't matter how hard people have been working. These events seem to have clearly breached the rules regardless, hence Downing Street receiving more COVID lockdown fines than any other building in the UK. And by the way, if you want more from TLDR, then you can check us out on Nebula. You've likely heard us talk about our streaming service Nebula before, but it's at its lowest price ever right now. So give me 1 minute to explain.
Oh, that's the end of it. Then the end of actual content of that video. But you know, I didn't know that he's just completely incompetent. Like the fact that he became prime minister in the first place over someone like Jeremy Corbyn is just it's unreal to me that people even trusted him with the most important job in the country. It's beyond kind of parody at this point, really. Like, how can you justify it? Like, how can you justify it? Now, the big question is, as you mentioned before, there, Surveying, like, will he step down? Will there be any punishment? Obviously, there's a £50 fine, but you know, if you've lied to Parliament, if you've lied to the House of Commons, the rules of the House state that unless you correct that record when it's been pointed out, you should step down. You should relinquish your position as Prime Minister, right? And he's not corrected the record. He's waited for the police to come out and say, or Sue Gray to come out and say that these things were broken, and then essentially just waited to get caught when he knew that he was lying. Like, that breaks the rules of Parliament. So really, he should resign. He absolutely should resign. That's definitely a thing that should happen. But do I actually care about the utility of is there any utility in him actually resigning as far as we're concerned from the left, right? I've said before, and there was a conversation I was having about this on Twitter previously, where we were talking about how many do we actually want him to resign? Is it good for us for him to resign? The media, and to be fair, a lot of the Labour kind of front bench as well, has spent a very long time trying to pin this as like a Boris Johnson issue by trying to say that the issue with Boris Johnson is that the issue with Partygate, even rather, is that this is Boris Johnson's problem. It's the culture that he's created, and him and Sunak are the ones who are uniquely to blame for what's going on, and that's why they should resign because it's them. They're it's not the wider Conservative Party that's the problem, and the one rule for us, another rule for them culture that is kind of pretty normalised in like public school spaces, which is the vast majority of Tory MPs at this point, right? But even Wes Streeting, as I've covered previously on stream, even Wes Streeting was talking about how, oh, well, Thatcher would have done this, Cameron would have done this, Theresa May would have done this. I'm like, well, probably would have done. Like, they've done plenty worse things than partying when they shouldn't have done. So the idea that they would have been above this is just complete nonsense. All you're doing is handing, along with the media, handing Boris, the Conservative Party in general, on a platter, an incredibly easy get out by them. Before an election comes up, or right now, just saying, okay, brilliant, we're sacking Johnson, we're sacking Sunak, we're going to replace them after a vote of no confidence, right? Next election comes up, and they say, oh, it's Liz Truss who's running, or it's Dominic Raab, or it's Jeremy Hunt, possibly even, because he's not part of like the inner cabinet clique associated with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. So it's Jeremy Hunt running. He goes, well, you can't pin the issues with Partygate, the issues with COVID, the issues with cost of living crisis onto me, because I wasn't in the cabinet. I wasn't part of the inner ring. I'm not Boris Johnson, and you've clearly delineated to us previously that this is a Boris Johnson issue. Now he's gone. We're just normal Conservative Party. We can weasel our way around it. And the Labour Party, you've just completely fucking fallen on their swords and go, yeah, well, if you get rid of Boris Johnson, we don't really have anything going for us the next election because they've not got any fucking policies. Which is, so do we really want Boris Johnson to go? No, I don't think so. I think we want him to contest the next election because he can't win. He can't win the election. There's no way that he can do so. And, the Tories even know this, right? Like, the Tories are incredibly well aware that their electoral chances have been completely kind of damaged by what's happened with these events, right? They've completely damaged by these events. And that's why we're seeing a bunch of people, so people like Tobias Elwood and Julian Sturdy and a couple of others, say, oh, well, we think that the Prime Minister should resign. I think it's gone up from like 15 to 17 who've submitted votes of no confidence at this point, right? And then you're just like, well, hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. First of all, like, it's completely cynical at this point. It's nothing to do with, let's come on to Tobias and Julian. It's nothing to do with some of the kind of the sanctity of the position of Prime Minister. Because if it was, you'd have got rid of Boris Johnson long before now, right? It doesn't matter about the hundreds of thousands of people who died because of like COVID mismanagement. It doesn't matter about all of the public money that got wasted on shitty contracts that got doled out to the Conservative Party's mates. It doesn't matter about any of that, right? Suddenly, oh, what crosses the line is the fact that they went to the illegal parties, or the fact they lied about the illegal parties, right? I'm sorry, but as far as I'm concerned, like it's not particularly high on my list of crimes committed by the Conservative administration, right? I mean, it's bad. Sure, it's scandalous. That's what it is. Like morally, it's not good. It's not horrendous though, but it's scandalous in the way that it was covered up and it was them lying and it was something that was against the spirit of the law when other people were making sacrifices. So it's scandalous and it's a slap in the face to kind of the normal people in the country, right? But is it? What's the actual kind of like negative utility of these parties? It's not exactly particularly high, is it? Like whatever. There was some parties. It's not something in the grand scheme of things caused too much actual physical harm to people. It's just it shows a certain attitude, right? So, but when people like Tobias Elwood and Julian Sturdy come up to us and say, well, we believe that the Prime Minister's position is untenable because it breaks the public's trust, I'm like, well, hang on a minute. Tobias Elwood's been an MP for 12 years. Julian Sturdy's been an MP for 17 years. They were MPs for the entirety of the time that the Conservative coalition, the Conservative government of 2015, they were MPs for the entirety of this. They kept voting along with the whip. They passed through welfare reforms. They passed through these dehumanizing disability assessment for welfare recipients, right? They green light all of this, right? If you were really genuinely cared about the integrity of public office, maybe you shouldn't have green lighted like a reign of terror on the poor and disabled that was inflicted by the Conservative Lib Dem coalition and then the Conservative government that followed. This ideologically led austerity economic program that was not only bad for the economy, but also literally sent people to their deaths. 130,000 people, up to estimated, died because of what happened during like the austerity program of the Conservative Party during kind of that period, right? Like, I'm sorry, you have no moral leg to stand on. Oh, well, actually, they went to the parties, that's bad. How about you fuck off, Julian? How about you fuck off, Tobias? How about you take ownership for the shit that you do like this, right? 46 times voted for a reduction in welfare payments, right? 12 times voted for reducing housing benefit for people who have excess bedrooms, right? 13 times voted against more welfare payments for people on disability. These people are monsters. These people are completely fucking monstrous. Yeah, people starve to death. There's a guy called David Clapson, and the image of David Clapson's face has been burnt into my brain for half a decade at this point. He was sanctioned by the benefits office for missing one meeting, right? He was diabetic, so he couldn't afford his wasn't affording he got this hypoglycemic or whatever. But they found his corpse in his flat with an empty stomach because he couldn't afford to feed himself. Yeah, people died because of starvation, or or plenty of other reasons why people killed themselves because they didn't know where they would be able to go to turn for food. To be able to, they couldn't see any kind of, especially disabled people, couldn't see like there was any particular, kind of way that they could live with dignity, considering the way in which they were demonized by the Conservative administration at the time, right? People died because of cuts to the health service, meaning that people who did have disabilities or they were ill in certain such a way couldn't get the adequate medical attention that they needed at the time, right? There's myriad factors, but the excess deaths during that period have been calculated that the austerity led to 130,000 excess deaths at that time, right? It's scandalous further than anything any kind of like illegal party or dodgy contract could ever kind of amount to, right? So if these people to turn around to us and try and like act like they're a moral authority, they can get to fuck as far as I'm concerned. They could just I just couldn't give a shit. Literally, it's literally the meme that I post on Twitter where it's like, well, I can excuse a decade of ideological social murder, right? But I draw the line at Boris Johnson eating some cake. That's it. That's all they have. That's all they have, right? I'm sorry. I obviously I talked about it in the video that I did a couple of days ago about MPs getting sad about people telling them on the internet that they'd killed people with policy. I'm like, well, yeah, you did. That's the thing that you did. So for them to turn around to us as like moral paragons of deciding that the prime minister's gone too far, and I'm like, why had he not gone too far when people had died during the pandemic, right? Why is the party the kind of the tipping point for you, right? There is no room at all, as far as I'm concerned, for any veneration of Conservative MPs who decides to put in a vote of no confidence for Boris Johnson right now. Right, nothing. And all the Liberals will be swooning over going, oh, well, I'm glad that there are some Conservative MPs with integrity. I'm like, well, if you had any fucking integrity, you wouldn't have been a Tory MP in the first place. No, I don't give a shit, right? But fair enough, you've passed like the minimum bar for what is acceptable, i.e., breaking the rules of the House of Commons, right? Because it's well within the rules. It's well within the rules for the Conservative Party to kill huge swathes of people by policy, right? That's in the rules. But lying to the House now, that is against the rules, and that's Conservative ideology in a nutshell. It doesn't matter about the overall impact, the material impact of the policies that you pass. All that matters is you follow the rules, right? That's it. That's all they care about. It's just like you can't really put it any plainer than that, to be honest.